listening to Food Rebels, and welcome. This is the podcast that brings you brands, chefs, and live on-air tastings. A show that's dedicated to the more rebellious side of the food world, where we celebrate the people who have challenged the status quo. We'll be giving you a peek behind the curtains and inside the minds of the people who are shaking up our food industry. You know me, I'm the show host, AJ Sharp, taste expert, food writer, great taste food judge, and of course, business owner. I love meeting new people and tasting new foods. So, sit back as we hear more stories from people in food who dare to be different. Hello and welcome to Food Rebels, the podcast where we meet the innovators, the rule breakers and the visionaries who are changing the way we eat and drink. I'm your host, AJ Sharp, and my guest today is Luke Hemsley, the founder of Wednesday's Domain. He's on a mission to create genuinely delicious, beautifully branded, 0% wine alternatives for discerning drinkers. Luke, welcome to Food Rebels.
Good afternoon, AJ. Thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be here.
I'm so interested in your story because you have come from quite a different background, I understand. And I mean, at what point did you decide to launch this kind of, you looked at the alcohol-free shelf and thought, right, I'm the person who's going to fix this?
Yeah, it's interesting when you phrase it like that. I think all food and drink entrepreneurs are probably filled with a healthy dose of optimism and naivety going into any business like this. My background, as you say, was outside of food and drink. I actually started my career as a commodities trader. I spent 3 years doing that and loved it, but quickly realized that I wanted to set up my own business and that being a trader was possibly the worst way to go about that. From there, I ended up working in 2 startups, both financial technology startups, both relating, interestingly now, to small businesses and how they manage their cash flow. And it was through that process that I realized that having stepped away from the world of physical products and physical supply chains, that actually they weren't that bad, and that any business that I were to set up in future had to have some kind of physical product, and layered on top of that had to have some form of delightful customer experience. And so it was through that lens that I was able to look at opportunities, and that was when I became interested in the alcohol-free space, how it had evolved, and how wine drinkers in particular, it felt like they'd been left behind when compared to the options available for those choosing beer or spirits when kind of browsing the alcohol-free aisle.
That is so true, isn't it? Because when I'm drinking alcohol, I often drink wine. But when I'm not drinking alcohol, I often drink a beer because I suppose I have an idea that the alcohol-free beers are, I don't know, maybe there's more variety there. And I don't know that I've found, and I haven't yet tasted yours, of course, I don't know that I've found before a really good alcohol-free wine. What is it that you have done here with Wednesday's Domain?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting question, AJ, and you're certainly not alone. I won't quote any statistics because I'll inevitably get them wrong, but there are huge numbers of wine drinkers who have experiences similar to your own, whereby when they drink an alcohol-free drink, they end up drinking beer because those are the ones that they feel are the best products, have the best variety, the best range, all that sort of stuff. In terms of how we've approached it and why we believe we're different, if you think about this from the customer standpoint or the problem that you're looking to solve, ultimately you're thinking about people who like wine, who enjoy a glass, often in the evening after work or with friends and family, but for whatever reason they don't want to drink in that moment. There are 2 ways that you can approach this problem or think about the solution. We tend to phrase it as top down or bottom up. So top down is taking an alcoholic wine and removing the alcohol, and there are a few different ways you can do that. Bottom up is saying wine has inherent complexity, is often referred to in terms of tasting notes. So we can take things like juices, ferments, teas, spices, combine those to create liquids which are also complex and interesting, but fundamentally aren't a wine. We think that the answer lies somewhere in between. So we work with very high quality alcoholic base wines, all sourced from La Mancha in central Spain. We then use the latest dealcoholization technology to gently remove the alcohol, and then we blend in some other elements post dealcoholization. So we blend in grape must and a small amount of juices to help return essentially the sensory characteristics of drinking a wine. So helping to bolster body, flavor, aroma, length, texture, all of those elements that make a wine and those elements that you don't necessarily always notice as a wine drinker, but you notice when they're not there. And so that's how we've approached things. And I think coming from outside of the drinks industry and coming from outside of wine really helps in that respect, because I wasn't bound by how you should do things. We just looked at it through the lens of how do we create the best tasting drink for wine lovers choosing not to drink for whatever reason.
I mean, you haven't gone into the easiest of all the different things. I mean, winemaking, of course, is notoriously complex, isn't it? People go and get full master's degrees in viniculture and viticulture to get really good at this. So did you partner with somebody? Did you partner with kind of winemakers to get to this point, or several winemakers maybe?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. I think, the quick answer is yes, but I think there's also a learning and a conversation here around when you're building a business, trying to work out what you're good at, sometimes what you're less good at and can get better at, and what you're never going to be good at and should just get someone else who is brilliant to help you with. And I think winemaking and liquid development definitely fall into the final camp. So when I started the business, when we first kind of conceptualized the idea of this great tasting, beautifully branded alcohol-free wine, I partnered with a drinks development agency to release the first versions of the wine. They were good, but they weren't great. They were horribly difficult to make. We had a shocking gross margin, and we would never have been able to scale that business. So over time, what I did was build a relationship with a brilliant award-winning English winemaker, and he happened to bring in someone that he knew who was a wine agent or a wine broker. So he sits between brands and wineries to connect supply and demand, essentially. So those two people have been utterly transformative for the business and bring a huge wealth of experience that I just didn't have. And then my job is really to kind of do everything that sits around that. And I almost have come to think of myself as like a Champions League football team manager, in terms of you're managing people from lots of different backgrounds, speaking lots of different languages with competing egos and aspirations and all that sort of stuff. And so that's how I've kind of approached it. And I absolutely love spending time with those people in those teams, because they have such a depth of knowledge that I could only ever hope to have a fraction of. But in answer to your question, yes, we absolutely have gone and partnered with people who know far more about this than I do.
Amazing. I want to dive more into all of that in a minute, but I'm going to just taste them, because we've chilled down all of the kind of rosés and whites, and I just kind of wanted to talk through some of the names. Is the best place to start with the éclat?
I would certainly start with the sparkling wines, and then we'll go light to dark as well in terms of grapes as well. So yeah, you've got our éclat there, which is our white sparkling. And rather than describe it to you, why éclat? Certainly when I started the business, Wednesday's Domain, which is a nod to the fact that we want to be the midweek wine alternative for food and drink lovers, we started with a white and a red, so piquant and sanguine, which I'm not sure if we're going to taste through today. But when we ended up expanding the range, I wanted to keep that kind of nomenclature or naming structure. So we just found these quite interesting French words that we felt mirrored what was in the bottle. So this is kind of life-giving, exciting, bursting, all that sort of stuff. That's what éclat is a kind of nod to.
It doesn't taste non-alcoholic. It tastes like a lovely sparkling white. It's got fresh flavors. There's all sorts going on there.
And that, in many respects, is the highest compliment
kind of elderflowery
that you can pay us, which is lovely. And what I hope you're getting is something it's bright, it's fresh, it's got a nice acidity, and kind of, as most importantly, it's got a dry finish. And that is the number one criticism of non-alcoholic wines, which is they're overly sweet, overly cloying. So we've really worked hard to stay away from that.
Yeah, it does have a lovely dry finish. And I've gone in for 2 or 3 tastes, which probably tells me that I actually really like it and I'm going back again. It's lovely. And you wouldn't immediately know that it was non-alcoholic. I think that's the real thought that is kind of coming through here, that it's got this sort of really interesting, like you say, a dryness on the finish. But I have got a lovely long length on the finish. It's quite citrusy, it's quite dry. There's a little bit of fruit in there, but it's beautiful.
I'm honestly delighted to hear you say that. Thank you.
And the next one is called piquant,
meaning
spicy. Is that right?
again, kind of bursting with energy. So spelled slightly different but yeah, has a bit of kind of spikiness to it and character. And this is our still white made with an ARN grape, which is very widely grown in Spain, but you don't find much of it here in the UK. So it's been a pleasure to kind of talk about that and promote that in our own way.
It's amazing. I'm obviously not tasting these in the perfect glasses because in the craziness of leaving the house this morning with small children, I didn't remember to bring the ISO tasting glasses with me. So I'm putting my hand over the top of the glass to try and capture those kind of aromatics and aromas so I can actually taste them all.
That's experience coming through there.
Again, lovely citrusy nature to that one. Slightly fruitier, rounder. Yeah, really interesting. A really interesting drink. It's got a fruit to it, though, that one. It's not sweet, but there is a fruitiness.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, AJ, because I think it has this very noticeable balance of sweetness and acidity, and I would always call it a kind of green apple sweetness that actually tends to open up after a few sips. And what you find is you've got that nice balance of those two elements that I just mentioned, and then it goes into quite a nice savoury finish. And what you often find with this is the one that people are slightly unsure about initially, and then you see them go back for a second, third, fourth sip or have it with some food, and it really starts to make sense in their minds.
Yes, that's it. There is that kind of green apple skin thing going on, but there's a sort of like a toastiness almost. It's really interesting. What did you say the grape was?
This is ARN.
I don't know ARN.
And so ARN's really interesting. It's massively kind of widely grown in Spain, but you don't find a huge amount of it in the UK. One of the things that we spoke about a lot when we released these wines was the importance of grape and whether or not the consumer cares about that. So should you lead with a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chardonnay or a Pinot Grigio? And actually we found two things. The first is, from a product standpoint, some of the more aromatic varietals, so Sauvignon Blanc, for example, when you dealkalize it, the flavor profile just goes completely out of whack. It's hard to describe, but you lose this kind of consistency of flavor when you're sipping it. And so that didn't work for us. That's not to say it wouldn't work in the future, but we just couldn't make it work at that point in time. The other thing is,
interesting.
And we have a mix of this within our range. If you're calling out a grape and you're leading with that, you've got to be very, very sure that it tastes exactly like the customer's expectation of that grape. And wine drinkers are very tribal in terms of, the three examples that I just gave: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. A lot of people who drink those grapes will say, I won't drink the other two, and they won't, deviate from that. So in choosing something like ARN, what we're saying is, this is first and foremost a delicious alcohol-free white wine, and then the grape is secondary to that. And I think we'll get to a point in time, as our abilities and the technologies improve, to be able to confidently call out a varietal. But at the minute, we felt that the most important thing was just nailing that space of white wine first.
Getting people used to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, this rosé as well. This is lovely, and it's been beautifully chilled, so it's got that kind of that vibe to it that you're expecting to taste. But it's refreshing. It's kind of clean and crisp, and there's notes of summer fruits, but it's not huge amounts of summer fruit. It's a hint.
Yeah, and I've yet to find a better word for it, but it almost has a bit of a tang and a bit of a lift. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier on is that we blend in some elements post-dealkalization. So this has a little bit of ginger, not so much that you can taste ginger, because that would be quite disconcerting in a wine, but it's enough that it creates a bit of complexity in your mind, and it's exactly what you're getting at there, AJ.
And this last one I'm tasting is Vignette, which is a red. You've got a couple of reds here, but I'm just going to taste one of them. I have to be very careful with red, alcoholic red.
Well, why is that?
It just reacts really badly to me. I don't know why.
Okay. Yeah.
One of those things. I love it. I absolutely love the flavour of it. Wow. That's incredible. It reminds me of a South African red, like kind of Journey's End kind of vibe going on. It's got like a lovely dustiness. And I mean that in a good way. I mean that kind of smoky aroma. What an interesting wine.
The process to creating this wine was a fascinating one. So within our range, we have, as Wednesday's Domain, we have 2 sparklings and 4 stills. And within that, the still wine range, we have 2 red wines. So Sanguine, which we won't be trying today, is a Tempranillo, and Vignette is a blend of an Oaks Petit Verdot and a Tempranillo. The base wine for this is a 16.5% wine. It's an absolute monster. To your point about certain red wines not agreeing with you, I don't think this wine would agree with anyone. It's a 16.5%. It's a headache in a glass instantly.
It's a fortified wine.
It is. It's kind of crazy. But what our hypothesis was that if you were to dealcoholize this, actually what it would do would be to concentrate a lot of those elements. And what you described when you spoke about that dustiness or that smokiness, those are kind of tertiary elements in a wine that people often refer to in terms of that are left by oak or maturation or something like that. And so, being able to concentrate those elements was something we were really, really keen to do. And we're really pleased with how it's turned out, because we think that one of the most underserved consumers within the alcohol-free wine space is the individual who loves a bigger, bolder, heavier red. So this was our kind of take on that.
Oh, it's great though. There's still all the lovely dark fruits, the kind of plummy, damsony, those rich fruit that you're expecting to taste in a red. But it's sort of, and it's got quite a bold finish as well. Like I definitely feel like I've just drunk some red wine in my mouth. I've got that finish of red wine. But
that's great.
You don't get the kind of the response that you normally get to an alcohol. It's slightly different, but I can see if you've already, I'm a big fan of zebra stripe drinking, where you have one alcoholic and one non-alcoholic. And I can see that if you've had an alcoholic drink and then you kind of fill in with these wines as well, I can imagine that just almost not realizing that you're drinking them.
And again, listening to you say that, I think the thing that leaps out for me is so much of this is contextual, or so much of how you experience drinks is contextual, in the same way that a rosé tastes better if you're on a holiday in the south of France in the sunshine versus drinking it in your mate's living room in November type thing. And so
you've got to be next to a pool and wearing a boater.
Exactly. So with this, if you're having this with a roast on Sunday or a delicious bowl of pasta or something like that, that's where it really works. And you mentioned that you love zebra striping. I think another really interesting approach is something called bookending, which I only heard of recently, but having a young daughter, I tend to do this, which is your first drink might be a non-alcoholic drink. You then drink alcoholic drinks for a certain part of the evening. And then later on, you might switch to a non-alcoholic wine or a non-alcoholic beer. And I think that's where, again, Vignette could really work nicely in terms of that latter part of your meal going through to, if you're having a main or dessert or whatever. I think it's perfect in that respect.
I think it's beautiful. What's the response been like from wine writers and, the notoriously difficult to please wine writers? How are they responding to it?
Yeah,
I mean, not like any other non-alcoholic wines I've ever tasted.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see the response, because when we released these new wines midway through last year, it was kind of relatively quiet for a period of time. And then all of a sudden, towards the back end of last year and the beginning of this year, particularly coming into dry January, there was kind of this flurry of amazing coverage, particularly around Vignette and Cuvée, our rosé sparkling. But we had a weekend where in the Times on Saturday, we had Jane McQuitty calling out Vignette, and then Will Lyons on the Sunday calling out Vignette. So we kind of had the back-to-back wine critic combo, which was amazing, because one of the biggest things that we compete against on a daily basis is the legacy of alcohol-free wine and the assumption that it's all terrible. And in a lot of cases, historically, that was true, which is why there are opportunities for businesses like ours at Wednesday's Domain. And so when you have someone like Jane McQuitty, someone like Will Lyons say, and I think Will Lyons calls it out as the best alcohol-free red he's tried, that is absolutely massive and really, really goes a long way to changing the narrative around not only us, but more importantly, the category.
Couldn't agree more. And I mean, have you noticed that there's a big shift towards people searching for non-alcoholic drinks and looking for those better alternatives? I suppose what I'm asking is, are people specifically searching for a type of wine that's non-alcoholic, or do you think they're kind of encountering you in a different way?
It's a good question, and something that I think about a lot. I think I think the rise of other alcohol-free drinks and other alcohol-free categories has benefited us enormously, and the quality of drinks in other categories. Because if you think about there being three primary drinks categories, beer, spirits, wine, beer and spirits arguably have cracked it or are perceived to have cracked it. And the quality of those products only continues to grow exponentially. So if you take the example of the beer category, people already thought that was pretty good. You had big conglomerates like Heineken pushing out Heineken Zero, and you had challenger brands like Lucky Saint coming through, and in the US, Athletic Brewing. All of a sudden, Diageo introduces or reintroduces Guinness 0.0, and that just changes the game entirely, because people, the number of people who say to me, it's almost imperceptible, is remarkable. People probably say that to me multiple times a week. And so what happens, similar to the point you made earlier in the conversation, AJ, you've got a lot of alcoholic wine drinkers who are suddenly beginning to say, hang on a sec, where's the non-alcoholic wine? Like, I know I can have a non-alcoholic beer, but where's the good non-alcoholic wine? So what you've got are two sets of people coming to the category. You've got those who had a bad experience previously and enough time has passed that they're willing to give it a go again. And then you've got others who'd never even considered that and are coming into it for the first time. And both are really exciting, because those who'd had a bad experience previously are quite pleased that they can find a good alcohol-free product. And finally, and those that are coming for it for the first time are interesting in a different way, because they're quite open-minded as to what the flavor profile of something like this can be. And so arguably they are easier to bring on board, but both groups of people, both groups of customers are super important.
I was curious about the name. Where did the idea behind Wednesday's domain come from?
Yeah, so the name came from the brain of someone far more creative than me. So we worked with a brilliant agency called Kuba and Friends, set up by a guy called Kuba Wieserek, who was one of the founders of Eve Sleep, if you remember them, the mattress company that had the yellow linings. And his team worked on it, and essentially we thought a lot about the customer, the occasion, and ultimately the motivations of someone drinking this product. And what we landed on was that the person most likely to drink a product like this was someone who drank alcohol, someone who liked wine, but they were looking for different options at certain moments. And we wrote down this big list of different moments you might consume wine. And the one we kept coming back to was that midweek moment where the kids have gone to bed, or you're home from work, or you're cooking dinner and you're hankering for a glass of wine, but you're sitting on the fence because you kind of really want one, but equally you shouldn't. And shouldn't, by the way, is a very personal thing. It might be shouldn't because you want to get up for a run, or because you are trying to drink less, or you've got work to do later on. And so that's where we decided on this notion of it being a midweek wine alternative for food and drink lovers. And Wednesday's Domain was just a kind of nice way of getting at that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm exactly probably your target market. That sort of, I know I want a drink kind of come 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. I want something that delineates the cup of tea or the cups of multiple cups of tea that I've had throughout the afternoon. I don't want that. I don't want the kids' squash either. I want something that tells me you're a grown up and now it's the evening. There's a connection there, that you're looking for that slightly, like you say, like the tannins, the complexity, the bitterness. There's something that just says, yeah, grown up drink, it's the evening.
And that's where I think the alcohol-free space in general is absolutely fascinating, because, again, coming back to how we approach it and coming back to how others approach it, we never ever demonize alcohol. We never ever say you shouldn't drink, or that wine is bad or anything like that. Quite the opposite. But it's about, if you think about that midweek occasion, one of two things tends to happen if you remove alcohol-free products. Either you have a glass of wine, you enjoy it in the moment, and then in the morning you think, little bit fuzzy, did I need that glass of wine? And you may end up slightly regretting it. You may not, but you may. Or you don't have a glass of wine, you spend the whole evening thinking, God, I bloody love a glass of wine. And then only in the morning do you get the benefit, because, you're feeling fresh and you leap out of bed and all that sort of stuff. So that's where alcohol-free products allow you to have your cake and eat it. They give you best of both worlds in many respects.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So you said, you've been this part of the entrepreneur community, and I know we haven't got a lot of time left, but I really am fascinated. Like, how has that been moving into the entrepreneur community? And was there any advice that you were given or that you would give to somebody else who is in a similar position?
I've been immensely, immensely lucky to be around a lot of brilliant entrepreneurs and to see the highs and lows of building a business. And, I think from the outside, a lot of people see the highs, but don't often consider the lows. And I would say with anyone building a business or looking to build a business, the lows are infinitely more frequent than the highs. And you just have to keep going one foot in front of the other every day, just get up and go again. But I think the most powerful question that I certainly discovered, and that I implore others to ask of other people when setting up a business, is finish every single conversation with, so who else should I be speaking to? And what that means is that from every conversation you have, you establish 1, 2, 3 links, and things you get the spider web of information and contacts from there that can help you to build that sort of continue building that business. And so I think that is massively, massively impactful. And I did that from day one through to now. And it's amazing what that allows you to do over a consistent period of time.
I can believe that. And for our listeners at home, where can they buy Wednesday's Domain?
So one of the things that we're obsessed with is kind of making things as easy and as convenient as possible for our customers. So wherever you live in the UK, you can get a bottle of Wednesday's Domain delivered to your door next working day through our website, which is wednesdaysdomain.com. And we have a number of different taster packs, starter packs through to full cases. You can also find us in wine shops, delis up and down the country. We're soon to launch a stockist page, which is long overdue. So if you head to our website, as I said, wednesdaysdomain.com, you can find us there. And also some bigger customers, so or bigger stockists. So we work with the likes of Ocado, we work with the likes of Laithwaite's, and we've also just launched into the Netherlands as of last week, and we're in close to 500 Albert Heijn stores out there. So for anyone listening in the Netherlands, and I hope there are a couple, you can now find 2 of our wines in Albert Heijn stores.
Amazing. And how much is a bottle?
So
I imagine it varies.
Yeah, it does. Our still wines are typically between £14 and £15, and our sparkling wines are somewhere around 19 with most retailers.
Lovely. So significantly less than most other sparkling wines would be.
Yeah, it's again, hearing you say that, it's so fascinating because I think about these things a lot. So alcohol-free wine, the price of alcohol-free wine has historically been anchored incredibly low. So you can go into a supermarket and you can buy a bottle of alcohol-free wine for £3 or £4. And so, but if you look at that against a bottle of champagne or a very nice Cremant, then arguably that's cheaper, or if not significantly cheaper. So it's all about your reference points. We kind of think about the brand as sitting somewhere in the middle, so kind of accessible premium in terms of its pricing and its positioning, and ultimately that's reflective of what's in the bottle and the process and the sourcing that goes into that. So we think we sit somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and the kind of people I think that would choose this over the £3 bottle of fizzy, sweet, whatever, are the kind who are choosing it because of it's got levels of complexity and tannins, and it's really giving you a wine-like experience and that's why they'd be happy to pay at that price point, I think.
Yeah. And again, what you're seeing, and you're seeing this on a kind of macro and global level, where when it comes to alcohol, people are buying less but better and being more deliberate and conscious in their choices. And we think the same is beginning to happen in alcohol free as well. Whether that's someone choosing a nice bottle because they want to enjoy it at home with their partner or their family, or they want to take something to a friend's house because they're not drinking or they know a friend isn't drinking. It's exactly that.
Oh, I love it. Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you. I think that's been a very inspiring talk to hear about your journey and hear about where you've come to. What's next for Wednesday's Domain? What can we expect to look out for?
Yeah. So next, there's a notion, particularly within startups, that you should focus on your home market first and foremost, and you should really nail things in your home market. It dawned on me about a year ago that if I was an Italian Pinot Grigio producer looking to sell my wines, I wouldn't try and sell them all up the road in Rome or Florence or wherever. I would find 10 to 15 international markets and get them out there where I know there's a high density of Pinot Grigio drinkers. And so we've started to do the same with Wednesday's Domain. And so to answer your question, what's next? We're beginning to land in some really interesting international markets. So I mentioned the Netherlands earlier on. We've just launched 2 of our wines into Albert Heijn there. We've got a fantastic importer and distribution partner called Really Good People out in Australia. They're already doing some really interesting things for us there. We're looking at both the US and the Middle East. So the first part of the answer to that question is showing up in a few more places around the world, hopefully being able to get the wines into the hands of a few more of your listeners, AJ. And then the other thing is we're exploring different products. I'm really, really interested by the low alcohol space, which for the purpose of this conversation, we're kind of defining as 5 to 7%. 18 months ago, maybe even 12 months ago, I would have said, I don't think really low alcohol is really a thing. I don't think consumers are ready for it. I don't really get it. I do now. And I think there's this growing mid-strength movement as it's been kind of collectively branded by a lot of businesses within the space. And I think what may start to happen is, as non-alcoholic products become more prevalent, people drinking full-strength wine, if you can get a cracking 6 or 7% wine, you might suddenly start to think, well, why am I drinking a 12 or 13% wine? I don't need to. And so we're exploring that as well. We've got no firm plans there, but those are the 2 main things I'd say. And really just continuing to deliver for existing and a growing number of new customers here in the UK as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, a mid-strength wine sounds absolutely perfect. I often think that when I'm sitting with friends and they're having a pint of beer and I'm having a glass of wine, and how, the ABV of these 2 drinks are so wildly different. I know the quantities obviously are different as well, but having a lower ABV wine, I can see that being way more sessionable, way safer, health-wise and all the other reasons.
It's really interesting. And, I mentioned, we were discussing at the start that I'm currently on holiday down in Devon. If I go to the pub down here, I love just having a kind of 3 low 4% ale, sitting there and having a few of those. That's kind of, real session beer. That's perfect in many respects. And so the question begins to become, and others, we're not the only ones looking at this, but that word session or the word sessionable is really beginning to come into wine, because so often that is how people drink it. You will have multiple glasses of wine at once, whether that's a long afternoon with a barbecue or sitting around having dinner, and actually, if you can create something that has absolutely no difference or very limited difference in terms of flavor profile, then it becomes a super, super interesting proposition.
It really does. I look forward to that. I'm going to watch this space. Luke, I can't believe it, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your journey with us.
Well, AJ, thank you very much for having me. It's been a joy, and if I can hopefully help anyone listening on here, then we've done a good job, and it's been time well spent.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers, AJ. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Food Rebels, which is available on radio stations around the UK and further afield. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Audible. Please remember to subscribe and rate us with 5 stars or follow us. It makes such a difference, not just to our podcast and radio show, but it really helps to support the guests that come on the show with us. We're also on Instagram at food_rebels. So give us a follow, do get in touch. We love hearing from you, and let us know what you think. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure you taste the rebellion.